How to increase role clarity and accountability. So this is initially designed for if you're a hiring manager or a project management lead, because you need to improve role descriptions to increase that accountability and clarity and understanding as well. But you don't have to be a PM lead. This could be for you if you are in a PM role and actually you want more clarity and actually accountability, just understanding what's expected of you. So it works both ways. So what I'm going to cover is job descriptions, why they don't work in some cases when it comes to actually starting your job and when they should be used versus when they shouldn't. And then I'm going to talk about some things that you can include into how you define your role to increase the accountability there, get great clarity so you know what success looks like, you know, the type of behaviors that breed success as well. And it's just a bit more real and realistic as well, because too often you start a job and the expectations are quite high, but you've got this long job description that actually is very, very practical, but doesn't really tell you that much about what's expected of you from a behavioral point of view. What does success look like? What are the outcomes you want to get from that role? So this is what I'm going to cover in this lesson. So the first thing is, don't use your job descriptions to describe your role responsibilities. And what I mean by that is, yes, you need a job description to advertise for a role, whether that's advertising internally or externally as well. But don't just take that, cut and paste that into your role description and expect to get the best out of those that you're hiring for. Because job descriptions, they work okay for the interview process because you want to start to explain the types of things that you're going to be responsible for. But I would actually say you need to do a lot more than that. But they're not great at explaining what you're accountable for and responsible for in the actual job itself. And I'll explain more. So the problem or the problems with the standard job description is often they're really generic. So like, you need good communication skills. What does that really mean? There's no context to it. There's all sorts of different types of ways to communicate as a project manager. And this one could be absolutely anything. So it's not very helpful. Or there might be too many requirements in there, because what happens, and I've actually done this myself, there's no job descriptions. You need to hire a new role. And you think, wow, we need to put in everything that we need from this person in there. And it just has this really long list of things, because you think, well, if we don't put it in here, then they might not do it, or we might not get the right person. But actually, it creates more problems. Often they're more focused on activities rather than outcomes, because yes, there's activities and tasks that you need to do as a project manager in a certain role. But what's really important is what are the actual outcomes you want to achieve in that role. Because if you just do activities, yes, you might get some positive outcomes, but also that might just mean you're really busy and you're just ticking the box, but you're not really understanding what outcomes are needed in that role to make it a real success. Often they're only used in the interview process, not on the job itself. So that's an even sort of worse way of doing it. You've got the job description, you agree to do that, but then you never hear anything else again. You just get started on the job and you work it out along the way. It doesn't describe what's expected of them. Yes, it might describe the requirements, but what's expected from a behavioral point of view, what's expected from the outcomes that I mentioned, what does success look like and things like that. And they're also very vague, like the good communication skills that I mentioned before, and not very measurable. How do you measure good communication skills if it's really generic? Instead, you want to set clear expectations for your team or that individual, whoever it might be. So you want to increase the accountability there. And what I mean by this is that word I've used already, outcomes. Focus on outcomes. What do you want them to achieve in that role? What does really good look like for them? So then you can picture it in your mind as well to go, I know where I'm going. And you can't dictate to project managers exactly what you need to do for absolutely everything. You need to use their skills and experience and their slightly different ways of doing things. But if you're all aligned with the same outcomes or similar outcomes, then you can make the most of what you've hired them for. And that's a new perspective There might have some new approaches that do things a little bit differently based on their experience. Then you want to talk about what behaviors do you want from them? So proactivity, empathy, you take ownership, you're an action taker, nothing complicated, but really important ones. And if this is in the interview process, as an interviewer, you want to be asking questions to try and find out what sort of behaviors do they typically exhibit when they are working, to try and find out if they're going to be right for you or not. But again, even if you're in the company already, talk about, right, if you're really proactive, if you see good examples of empathy, if I see you taking ownership of, challenging situations, whether you know how to solve it or not, and then you get stuff done, those are the types of behaviors that I really want to see. And I'm going to be asking questions about in your reviews and things like that, because we know those type of behaviors result in positive outcomes when used. There's obviously can be others as well, but there's some examples. You want to find ways to measure what they do. So in the metrics, you don't want to measure everything because, one, it's not realistic. You won't have the time. And a lot of the time, it's a waste of time as well. So think about what metrics really matter for you and then measure those. Because when you're reviewing a role and you're working on progress, career development, things like that, you want to have a mix of these different things. You want to understand, are they exhibiting those really important behaviors for you? Are they achieving those outcomes? What metrics are really important? Are they hitting those metrics? So you want to get a blend of quite a few different things versus just all about the metrics. And then there's always ways to play those metrics and get them to work in your favor. You want to talk about what success looks like. You can write this down as well, to confirm in writing that this is what we mean for all of this. But it's really important not just to talk about this, but to actually describe what success, some real examples. Like you can talk about, well, here's an example. This type of thing happened. This individual done this and it had a really positive outcome. That's what success looks like. For your project, success would look like this. And it's not always you deliver the project on time, on budget, in scope, because there's a lot of things that are out of your control. But success on a project can mean many different things. Like the client is actually really happy where it went. Yes, we had to go through some difficult moments and maybe we changed direction a bit. We actually had to invest a bit more money into it, but the client loved it and they're actually coming back for some more work. Now that is success as well. Detail what they're responsible for. For example, this isn't just for project managers, but everybody on a project team should be responsible for the successful delivery of the project. It's not just down to the project manager, because that's where problems occur when the project manager feels like they're responsible for the success of the project. Yes, a really important role to make it successful. Everybody has to be involved. So again, this is just one example, but detail what they're responsible for. Detail what they're accountable for. As a project manager, a classic example is risks, but you're not responsible for ensuring that there's no risks on the project or taking all the actions to mitigate the risk. But what you should be accountable for is ensuring that everybody is aware of the key risks on there. So like facilitating the process. Second to last point there about responsible. Sometimes you can reflect that one back to accountable as well. Because ultimately everybody's accountable for the success of the project. But just think about the different ones, the responsible versus accountable. So it's a really nice way to split up how you describe the role on the project. So job descriptions describe the what, accountable descriptions, or responsible and accountable descriptions defined like the how well and the when. When do you get this done by, like the metrics aspect of it? What does success look like? Things like that. And a few tips to help create more accountable descriptions. Think about what problems could be better managed or prevented with certain behaviors. So I'm assuming on your projects within your company, you have some problems. Now, think about those problems. Then think about what things happen from a behavioral point of view that actually help manage those situations. And then you can flip those behaviors back into that role description, like I described before. Create that cross-team accountability. That could be client happiness, project success, quality levels. Make sure that you've got either responsibilities or accountabilities that go across the team as well, because ultimately it's all about the team. You can't put the responsibility all onto one person. Link some outcomes to department or business goals. Now, this could be successful winning of phase 2 of the project. That is a good outcome of this project. And again, that's not just on an individual, but that might be something as a company or as a department that you actually want to achieve. So it's good to have outcomes that are, and responsibilities that actually link into sort of the bigger picture. It shouldn't all just be about the individual. Then, like point 1, just another way of looking at it, what behaviors create success? So I gave you some examples before, like empathy, proactivity, things like that. Think really carefully about what behaviors have a really positive impact on your team, your projects, your clients, and then talk about those and find ways and examples to actually practice those behaviors and work on them. Because sometimes some of these behaviors you come up with might come naturally to someone. You might not be a very proactive person in terms of your approach, but there's loads of ways and things and reminders and prompts and things like that you can do to enable you to be more proactive. Then what are the most common challenges and how could they be proactive to prevent them? So linked into that last point when I was talking about proactivity, nothing beats preventing problems by simply being more proactive in your actions. Because the more proactive you are in your actions, in your communications, your approach, whatever it might be, the chances of you then having problems on your projects are going to be reduced. Because often, basically, problems, or let's call them issues, initially they were risks. And because someone hasn't talked about them, managed them, been proactive about them, they turn into an issue at some point. So always be thinking about how in your role descriptions can you get them to be more proactive to fix or prevent, the most common challenges, the most common issues. So again, think about those common challenges that you have on a project, and then what could you do or what could they do as part of their roles to be more proactive to prevent them. And then measure what matters most. Whenever you're asked to measure on a project in terms of for your role, then always question, why does that matter? Why is it important? So just be very careful, but also make sure it's realistic as well. Because if it's not realistic, then it's not going to get done. And the problem with that is then people get frustrated. And before you know it, come around to reviews again and people haven't been hitting their targets and things like that because they just simply can't. It's not realistic. And then the final point is describe everything using scenarios, examples, because when you talk in scenarios and using real life examples versus writing it down, then it's just easier to understand. You get, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, now you've explained it in that way. Versus just writing it down, they might nod their heads and say, I understand what this is, but everybody reads the written word a little bit differently or understands it a little bit differently. But by describing things with real examples, it's a really good way, and backed up by putting it in writing as well, to get a clear understanding. Because going back to that, one of those first words that I used when we opened up this lesson is clarity. You've got to get clarity. If, as a team lead, that you are not totally aligned with this more accountable and responsible role description with the individual, then all that means is you're going to be going down slightly different routes. You're going to be forking off to the left, your expectations, while their expectations and what they think they should be doing is going off to the right. And then when you finally talk about it, you're miles apart and you've got a problem and you've got to reset. So clarity is so important, and you do that by describing and talking about and using examples as much as you possibly can. So that's it. That is how to create more accountable, more responsible role descriptions that actually work, actually matter, and are much more beneficial for the individual who has them as well, versus using a job description, which is often just a list of things and tasks that you need to do, but it doesn't really tell the full story of what's expected of them.